You have done this before. You typed a name into a box and a record appeared. A grandfather. Then his father. Then his. Each one a small certainty. A birth. A marriage. A place you could point to on a map. And then nothing. For millions of families whose roots run back to Ireland, the trail does not fade gently. It stops. It stops at a wall, somewhere in the early 1800s, the generation just before the Great Hunger. The people are there. You know they existed, but the paper that would name them is gone. This film is about that wall, why it exists, and it is two stories that are really one. The first is the story of the world that lived behind the wall. A crowded, Irish-speaking, potato-fed island of 8.5 million souls, a world that generated more paper about itself than any age before it. The second is the story of a single afternoon in 1922, when most of that paper burned. This is the world before the hunger and the fire that erased it. To understand why the records matter, you first have to understand how many people there were to record. In the year 1700, Ireland held perhaps 2 million people. By 1800, around 4 million. And by the eve of the Great Hunger, in 1845, roughly 8.5 million. It was one of the most densely populated rural societies in all of Europe. Not in its cities, in its countryside. The fields themselves were crowded with people, and nearly all of them balanced on one thing, the potato. It had arrived centuries before, and it had remade the country on a scrap of poor, wet, rocky ground where no grain would grow. A single acre of potato ridges could yield close to 6 tons, about a year's food for an entire family. So people could live and marry and multiply on less and less land. By the 1830s, about 1/3 of the whole population depended on the potato for 90% of everything they ate. 1/3 of the population depended on the potato for 90% of its food requirements. One crop holding up millions of lives. Remember that number, 8.5 million. By 1901, after the hunger and the ships and the long bleeding of emigration, it would be 4.4 million, nearly cut in half. But that is the next story. This one is about the world at its fullest, and how we know it was there at all. The way the land was held would matter enormously, both to how these people lived and to the records they left behind. Much of rural Ireland still ran on an old communal system called rundale. A family's land was not one tidy field. It was a scatter of narrow strips spread across the good ground and the bad, shared and periodically redistributed among neighbours. At the centre of that scattered land sat the clachan, not a planned village, but an organic cluster of cabins, families farming the strips around them. Below even the small tenant came the truly landless. A man might rent a patch under a system called cnachanacre, a sliver of ground, often less than an acre, let for a single season to grow one crop of potatoes at a punishing seasonal rent. Many were cottiers, labourers who held a cabin and a small plot and paid their rent not in coin, but in their own labour, working the landlord's land to keep the roof over their family. And here is the quiet thread to hold on to. Every one of these arrangements made paper, leases, rent rolls, estate maps with tenant names inked beside each plot. The poorest people in Europe were almost invisibly being written down. Above it all sat the landlords. Many never saw their estates at all, absentee landlords, drawing rents in England. In 1842 alone, an estimated £6 million in rent was remitted out of Ireland. The Earl of Lucan held over 60,000 acres. Beneath the landlords, middlemen leased great tracts and sublet them in ever smaller scraps, profiting from every division. Middlemen would split a holding into smaller and smaller parcels so as to increase the amount of rent they could obtain. In 1835, a young Frenchman named Alexis de Tocqueville travelled through Ireland and listened to evicted tenants. One thing they said to him he never forgot: "We have a little land which we need for ourselves and our families to live on, and they drive us out of it. Emancipation has done nothing for us." Most of these families held their land at will. They could be put out at the landlord's word. Their lives were small and precarious and almost entirely undefended. And yet, line by line, in tithe books and rent rolls and parish registers, they were leaving a trail. Step inside one of these homes. In the census of 1841, the government sorted Irish housing into 4 classes. The lowest, the 4th class, was a one-room mud cabin. More than 40% of all rural families in Ireland lived in one. The food was potatoes. An adult labouring man might eat between 10 and 14 pounds of them in a day, boiled at morning, noon and night, washed down with buttermilk, with perhaps a herring or an egg on a good day. It sounds like deprivation, but strangely it worked. Potatoes and buttermilk together carry very nearly every nutrient a body needs. A labouring man took in something like 5,500 calories a day. Before the hunger came, the Irish poor were among the best nourished, most physically robust, and tallest people in all of Europe. But there was a flaw written into it. The variety they grew more and more was a single kind: the lumper, watery, coarse, but heavy yielding and cheap. By the 1840s, a third of the population grew almost nothing else. One crop, and within it, one variety. A whole people fed by a plant with almost no genetic variation. No one understood yet what that meant. It meant that whatever could kill one plant could kill them all. In February 1845, months before the Blight, a government inquiry, the Devon Commission, described the labourer's family in words the Empire could not later claim it had not heard. In many districts, their only food is the potato, their only beverage water. Their cabins are seldom a protection against the weather. A bed or a blanket is a rare luxury, and nearly in all, their pig and a manure heap constitute their only property. This was the world, poor, crowded, fed on a single thread, and it was about to be the most thoroughly recorded generation of poor people Ireland had ever produced, just before the records, and so many of the people were lost. There was something else in these townlands the records barely caught, because it lived in the air, not on the page. The Irish language. On the eve of the hunger, the historian Cormac O'Grady estimates there were 3 to 3.5 million Irish speakers, an all-time high. Some studies put it closer to 4 million. Out of 8.5 million people, that is a vast living tongue. An Irish-speaking figure of 3 to 3.5 million on the eve of the famine, an all-time high. But it was overwhelmingly a spoken language, the carrier of a vast inheritance of Gaelic poetry from the old bardic tradition. Most of what the ordinary people said, sang and remembered was never written down at all. It survived the way it always had, mouth to ear, songs, stories told at the hearth, and in the hedge schools, informal classes held in barns or behind hedges, born in the days when Catholic education was outlawed. Children learned reading, Latin, arithmetic, and kept the old history and language alive by heart. And here is the cruelty in the timing. The hunger, when it came, fell hardest on exactly these places, the poor, Irish-speaking West. The catastrophe did not only kill people, it killed a language at its fullest, in the very generation that spoke it most, which means that for many families, the words their ancestors actually spoke are gone beyond any record. What is left is the paper. And we are coming now to the paper. To understand the records, who kept them, who was left out of them, you have to understand faith. Roughly 80% of the people were Catholic, and for generations they had lived under the long shadow of the penal laws. Those laws, at their height, had barred Catholics from freely buying or inheriting land, from holding office, from voting. A Catholic's land, by law, had to be split among all his sons. unless one converted to the Protestant faith. The effect was a Protestant landed ascendancy, and a Catholic majority kept poor and landless. The relief came in stages, and in 1829 Catholic emancipation, the Roman Catholic Relief Act finally let Catholics sit in Parliament and hold high office, but for the rural poor, it changed almost nothing. At the very same moment, the property qualification to vote was raised, from the 40-shilling freehold to the £10 freehold, disenfranchising more than 80% of Ireland's voters, including most tenant farmers. The poor man on his rented acre had gained a church free to worship and a vote he no longer qualified to cast. His name would survive if it survived at all, not in the rolls of citizens, but in the ledgers of those he owed. The tithe books, the rent rolls, the parish registers. So let I finally open them. Here is the heart of the first story. For all its poverty, the pre-famine world was generating paper about itself as never before. These are the records that could let a family today climb back over the wall. Watch them, because in the second half of this film, most of them burn. The tithe allotment books, compiled between 1823 and 1837 to assess what every occupier of farmland over an acre owed in tithes, a tax paid even by Catholics, to the Protestant Church of Ireland. They list the townland, the occupier's name, the acreage, the sum due, heads of household, named parish by parish, a pre-famine snapshot of who was on the land, the government censuses. The first full one in 1821, then every 10 years, 1831, 41, 51. The 1841 census was the most sophisticated yet. Names, ages, relationships, occupations, even the class of the house. Exactly what a genealogist dreams of. Hold that thought. Remember those 4 years. The parish registers, baptisms, marriages, burials, kept by the churches. For most ordinary Catholics, before civil registration began in 1864, these are the only record that they were ever born, married, or buried at all, the deepest line back in time we have. The estate papers and rent rolls, the landlord's own books, naming their tenants and holdings, scattered, private, patchy, and for that reason, precious. And just after the hunger, the greatest of them all, Griffith's Valuation, directed by Richard Griffith, published between 1848 and 1864 to set who owed the poor rate. It names the occupier, the landlord he leased from, the description and acreage of his holding, its value, tied to a map you can stand on today. It is the most comprehensive surviving household survey of mid-19th century Ireland. Tithe books, censuses, parish registers, estate rolls, Griffith's Valuation. Together, a trail, fragile, hand-inked, but real, leading back to the people behind the wall. And here is where the two stories meet. Because much of this paper, the censuses of 1821 to 51, the registers of more than 1,000 parishes, the wills, the deeds, was gathered up over the decades and brought to one place for safekeeping. One building, in Dublin, on the bank of the Liffey, the safest place in Ireland to keep the memory of a nation. Until it wasn't. It was called the Public Record Office of Ireland. Established by an Act of Parliament in 1867, it stood within the Four Courts complex on the north bank of the River Liffey, in the heart of Dublin. Behind its walls rose the Record Treasury, a purpose-built repository, tier upon tier of shelving, holding the administrative, legal, and probate memory of the island going back roughly 7 centuries. Think of what was in there. The census returns of 1821, 31, 41, 51, and the later ones too. The Church of Ireland parish registers of around 1,000 parishes deposited there for safekeeping, wills and testamentary records reaching back centuries, chancery records of crown grants and land going back to the 14th century, some material older still, to the 13th. Within a few hours, 7 centuries of Ireland's historical records were gone. Everything a nation needs to remember its ordinary people, gathered, catalogued, and stacked under one roof. It had survived rebellions and centuries. It would not survive the summer of 1922. To understand how it burned, you have to understand a country tearing in two. In December 1921, the Anglo-Irish Treaty ended the War of Independence with Britain, but it split the men who had fought that war over an oath to the Crown and over the partition of the North, those who accepted the treaty and those who would not. On the 14th of April 1922, about 200 anti-treaty fighters, their spokesman Rory O'Connor, alongside Liam Mellows and Joe McKelvey, marched into the Four Courts and occupied it. A garrison, a headquarters, a deliberate provocation meant to force a confrontation that might reunite the movement against Britain. They turned a building full of the nation's records into a fortress, and inside it, among the shelves of parchment, they stored munitions. In London, Winston Churchill made the British position brutally clear to Michael Collins, head of the new provisional government. Deal with the garrison or British troops would do it for him. Britain even loaned field guns, 2 18-pounders and some 200 shells from its stores at Kilmainham. By late June, the guns were across the river from the Four Courts, pointed at the building. Inside were men with little more than rifles, and behind them, on the shelves, 7 centuries of a nation's memory. At 4 o'clock in the morning, on the 28th of June, 1922, the National Army opened fire. These were the opening shots of the Irish Civil War. Shell after shell crossed the river into the Four Courts. The garrison answered with small arms, but small arms cannot answer artillery. For 3 days they held, outgunned, surrounded, the building breaking around them. And then on the 30th of June came the moment this whole film turns on. A massive explosion tore through the Record Treasury, the Western Bloc, the part the garrison had used to store its explosives. A towering cloud rose some 200 feet into the Dublin sky, and out of that cloud came the records. Burning leaves of paper and parchment, flung hundreds of feet into the air, drifting down across Dublin. Some fragments carried, it was said, all the way to Howth, 10 kilometers away. 7 centuries of writing, falling as ash and embers over the rooftops. One of the garrison commanders, Ernie O'Malley, watched it rise. A thick black cloud floated up about the buildings and drifted away slowly. Fluttering up and down against the black mass were leaves of white paper. They looked like hovering white birds. At 3:30 that afternoon, O'Malley surrendered. The battle was over, but the loss had only begun to be understood. Grew lit the spark, we still cannot say for certain. The garrison had stored explosives among the records. The shells that pounded the building for 3 days were the new government's. A 1996 judicial review and a study in 2018 found no evidence that the defenders deliberately blew it up and leaned instead toward the shelling reaching the munitions. Both sides bear the weight of it. What is not in dispute is what was lost. So, what burned? The census returns of 1821, 31, 41, and 51, the 4 years I asked you to remember, incinerated. The detailed, name-by-name record of pre-famine and famine-era Ireland, gone, but for fragments. The Church of Ireland parish registers of around 1,000 parishes, roughly 2/3 of them, deposited there for safekeeping, burned. Most pre-1858 wills, many later ones, title deeds, and the medieval chancery records, crown grants and administration reaching back to the 14th century, a few pieces to the 13th. In total, over 500 collections destroyed in a single afternoon. The census records for the whole of the 19th century, going back to the first in 1821, were incinerated, along with thousands of wills and title deeds. This is the wall. This is the afternoon that put the blank box at the top of so many family trees. If your Irish line stops in the early 1800s, there is a good chance the record that would have carried you further was on those shelves on the 30th of June 1922. But, and this matters more than almost anything else in this film, not everything was lost. The wall is not the end of the story. Begin with what was never in the building. Most Roman Catholic registers were held in their local parishes, not in the record office, and they survived. Civil registration, which began in 1864, survived, and roughly half of the Church of Ireland registers survived too, because many clergymen had simply never sent theirs to Dublin in the first place. The censuses of 1901 and 1911 survived, stored elsewhere, never in the burned treasury. Today they are free to search online, and they are the bedrock on which Irish genealogy now stands, and even from the ashes, they pulled what they could. From the 17th of July 1922, the record office staff went into the rubble. Within about a year, they had packed some 25,000 salvaged sheets into nearly 400 bundles. Scorched, fragile, but saved. And then, a century later, something extraordinary. On the 27th of June 2022, the 100th anniversary, 3 days before the fire's centenary, Ireland reopened the Record Treasury, not in stone, in light. The virtual Record Treasury of Ireland, led by Trinity College Dublin, proposed by Dr. Peter Crooks. It is a free online treasury, rebuilt from copies, abstracts and transcripts that had been scattered across the world before the fire, and so survived it. Archivists worked for 3 years, joined by partners across the globe, the National Archives at Kew, the Records of Northern Ireland, the Church of Ireland's Library, the Huntington Library in California, archives in America, Australia, and France. At its launch, it held over 150,000 records and 6,000 maps, reaching back to the year 1174. The goal, some 50 million searchable words, covering every surname and every place name in Ireland. The scale we were finding was almost overwhelming. The question is how we prioritized. They call their full reconstructions gold seams, entire lost series rebuilt from the fragments. The fire had destroyed most of the 1766 religious census. The project has recovered the vast majority of its data. In some places, as much as 80% of what burned has been brought back. What the fire took in an afternoon, a generation of archivists is patiently giving back. So come back to where we began. The tree that climbs and stops at a blank box in the early 1800s. Now you know why the box is blank. And you know it is not the end, because the records the fire took are not the only records there ever were. The Tithe Appointment books from before the famine. Griffith's valuation from just after. The surviving parish registers kept safe in country churches. The 1901 and 1911 censuses and the virtual record treasury rebuilding the rest, line by patient line. These are the substitutes, the handholds, the way over the wall. It is harder than typing a name into a box. It takes patience and the right records and someone who knows where to look. But the people behind the wall are not unreachable. They were written down in tithe ledgers and rent rolls, in valuation books and baptism entries, and much of that writing survived the fire or has been rescued from it. The world before the hunger was real. 8.5 million people on their scattered strips of green, speaking a language that filled the air, fed by a single fragile crop. A fire took most of the paper that named them. It did not take all of it, and what it took, we are bringing back. If your line runs back to that island, there is a wall waiting for you, somewhere in the early 1800s, but there is also a way across it. And finding that way, for your family, name by name, is exactly what we do.